people who build their entire lives around an image, not who they are, but who they want to appear to be. And as long as that image holds, everything works. The direction is clear, the energy has somewhere to go, the effort makes sense. But when something breaks it, when a fall, a loss, or a wound shatters that construction, a question gets exposed that had been pushed aside for years. Who am I now without this? Ignacio de Loyola arrived at that question in the worst possible way. His legs shattered by a cannonball, lying in a bed he never chose, in a house he had returned to without victory or glory. He was 30 years old, and his life, as he had imagined it, was over. He was born in 1491, in the castle of Loyola, in the Basque country. He was the youngest of several siblings, son of a noble Basque family with ambitions tied to court life and the chivalric tradition. He grew up in a world where honor was real currency, where a family name was worth as much as any inheritance, and where valor on the battlefield was the most direct path to recognition. He was shaped by that atmosphere. He learned to move through aristocratic circles, to read the codes of power, to desire the admiration of his peers. He was intelligent, passionate, strong-willed, and he had the kind of character that does not bend easily before anything or anyone. He was not a violent man by temperament, but he was a man who wanted to leave a mark. The distinction matters. He was not looking to destroy. He was looking to prevail. He wanted his name to mean something. And in the world he inhabited, that was achieved through military deeds, through well-placed loyalties, through the ability to be on the right side at the right moment. In that game, Ignacio was a serious player. In 1521, while defending the city of Pamplona against French forces, a cannonball shattered one leg and wounded the other. The city fell. Ignacio could no longer fight. The French soldiers themselves, recognizing his bravery, had him carried to the castle of Loyola to be treated. There began a long and painful recovery, marked by several surgeries without anesthesia, by a healing process that left one leg shorter than the other, and by an immobility that, for someone like him, was almost unbearable. He asked for books of chivalry, adventure stories, tales of heroes, the kind of reading that fed his imagination and kept him connected to the world he had lost. But in the castle, there were only two texts available: a life of Christ and a book about the lives of the saints. He picked them up without much enthusiasm. There was nothing else. And something happened. Slowly, almost without him noticing. When he read about battles, conquests, and noble women he wanted to impress, his imagination caught fire. He would spend hours building scenes in his mind, feeling capable, admired, victorious. But when he came back to the present, when the fantasy ended, there was an emptiness he could not explain, as if all that excitement left nothing behind. Then he would read about Christ, about Francis of Assisi, about Dominic of Guzman. Those pages lit something in him too, a kind of admiration mixed with a challenge. Why couldn't I do something like that? Why couldn't I live with that kind of dedication? But when he finished those pages, the feeling did not go out. Something remained, something that resembled peace, a calm that did not depend on things going well. That difference, which might seem small, was the seed of everything that followed. Ignacio did not yet call it discernment. He did not even fully understand it. But he began to pay attention. He began to observe himself with an honesty he had never needed before, because he had never stopped long enough to try. When he could move again, he decided he needed to do something with all of it. He set out for Montserrat in Catalonia, where there was an ancient Marian shrine. There, Before the image of the Virgin, he carried out a gesture he had been thinking about for weeks. He surrendered his weapons, his soldiers' clothes, and spent a night in prayer vigil. It was not a theatrical act. It was a real act of letting go. He was releasing the image of the soldier he had been. He did not yet know clearly what would come next. After Montserrat came Manresa, a small town near the Cardener River, where he had planned to stay only a few days before making a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. He stayed nearly a year, and it was the year that shaped him. In Manresa, Ignacio entered an interior experience that had no precedent in his life. He prayed for hours. He imposed harsh penances on himself. He kept a spiritual journal where he recorded what he felt, what he thought, what he believed he was hearing in his own depths. But he also went through serious crises, doubts about whether God was listening, temptations to abandon everything, periods of darkness that pushed him close to despair. It was not a time of serenity or constant clarity. It was a time of deep interior work, of honest disorientation, and of learning through lived experience. Out of that process emerged what would eventually become the core of the spiritual exercises. Not as a rule book or a devotional manual, but as an ordered path to help a person come to know their own desires more clearly, to distinguish what moves them toward life and what pulls them away from it, and to make decisions with greater interior freedom. It was, in essence, what he himself had learned to do during his recovery and his months in Manresa. Stop, observe, listen, and choose with more clarity. He made his pilgrimage to the Holy Land, as he had wanted. He hoped to stay and work in evangelization there. The local religious authorities would not allow it, and he had to return. That refusal led him to a conclusion that would reshape his entire path. He needed to prepare himself better. Enthusiasm and goodwill alone were not enough. He needed knowledge, formation, and real tools. At over 30 years old, Ignacio went back to school. He learned Latin alongside teenagers. He studied in Barcelona, Alcalá, and Salamanca. He ran into trouble with the Inquisition, not for heresy, but for teaching spirituality without a theological degree. He kept going. He eventually reached Paris, where he studied for years and where he found the men who would become his first companions: Francis Xavier, Peter Faber, and other young men who shared his desire to live the faith in a radical and mission-driven way. That group, gathered around Ignacio and the spiritual exercises, was the origin of the Society of Jesus, a religious order founded not to withdraw from the world, but to enter it fully, into universities, missions, hospitals, royal courts, and the margins of society. In 1540, Pope Paul III officially approved the society. Ignacio became its first superior general and led the order from Rome until his death in 1556. In Rome, his life was quiet. Nothing like campaigns or conquests. His days were spent administering, writing letters, giving spiritual direction to people across Europe, making decisions about missions in Asia, Africa, and the Americas. It was less visible work than anything a soldier does, but infinitely more demanding. It required precision, patience, the ability to hold competing needs in tension, and the same energy he had once poured into military campaigns now applied to building something that would outlast any battlefield victory by centuries. He was canonized in 1622, alongside Teresa of Avila, Philip Neri, and Francis Xavier, his old companion from Paris. The Church recognized him as patron of spiritual retreats and discernment. But his real influence is harder to contain in a title. It lives in the millions of people who have made the spiritual exercises across the centuries, in the universities the Jesuits founded on every continent, and in an approach to the interior life that remains completely relevant today. Because the question Ignacio began asking himself in that bed during his recovery is not a question from the 16th century. It is the same question that surfaces when someone loses a job their entire identity was wrapped around, or when a project they bet everything on falls apart, or when they reach a certain age and realize they have been running without really knowing where. What desires leave me empty when I follow them? Which ones leave something that does not fade as quickly? What am I doing with my life, and why? Ignacio never stopped being intense. He did not become a gentle, easygoing person. Until the end, he was known as someone of firm will, clear decisions, and nearly unmatched energy. What changed was the direction. He no longer lived to build his own image. He learned, slowly and through many failures, to aim that energy towards something that did not depend on his own glory. He lost the Battle of Pamplona. He lost his military career. He lost the image of the young nobleman who was going to impose himself on the world through sheer courage and determination. And in the space left by everything he had lost, he found something he had not expected: the freedom of not living for himself. A freedom that, in the end, turned out to be far more lasting than any victory he could have won with a sword.